The arena was quiet, too quiet for a place where death usually danced in front of a crowd. Thousands of eyes waited behind glowing glass screens. Alien voices whispered from every corner, curious, afraid, hungry for fear and blood. In the center of the Koza arena stood a cage, not metal, not stone, but something stronger, a field of living energy, designed to hold creatures that had destroyed planets behind. The golden curtain at the royal balcony stood Princess Valzara, her silver eyes cold, her crown glowing. Under the twin suns, she had tamed the void hydra last week. Before that, she broke the mind of a lava serpent from the lower moons, and now she was bored again. "I asked for something untamable," she said in a voice like ice, "something even nature itself fears." The council had listened, or at least they pretended to. They had sent scouts to the edge of the dying stars. They searched the ruins of war, and they returned with a creature no one had seen before. Human. He was thrown into the cage without a sound, no ceremony, no chains, just a cold wind that followed him as he stepped inside. He didn't roar, didn't shake the cage, didn't even look around. He simply stood there, covered in dirt, his skin marked with burns and cuts, his clothes torn, like a soldier who had fought 100 battles and walked away. The audience waited for him to scream or curse or panic like other creatures usually did when trapped. But the human did none of that. He lifted his head slowly, looked at the princess, and smiled, not the smile of someone broken, but the smile of someone who knew something no one else did. Valzara narrowed her eyes. She had seen beasts with claws the size of spears. She had fought monsters that spoke in poison and shadows. But this one, this human, felt different. He looked so calm, too calm. One of her beastmasters whispered, "He doesn't fear us. I think he is studying us." Valzara gave a signal. The floor shifted, walls moved. The cage tightened, spikes of light pressed closer to the human. Still, he did not move. Then a second command, a loud sound, filled the arena, high-pitched, sharp enough to make any creature lose its mind. But the human blinked once, then sat down cross-legged like a monk. Silence fell again. Valzara stepped forward. She raised her voice. "Speak your name, creature." The human didn't answer. She tried again, louder, more firm. "Do you understand me, or are you just another dumb beast?" The human lifted his head. His voice was calm, dry, almost gentle. "My name is not important." The crowd gasped. No creature had ever dared speak like that to the princess. She walked down the steps closer, each step slow, and measured. Guards followed, but she raised her hand to stop them. She entered the arena floor. The cage stood between her and the human, a wall of energy humming softly. She stood right in front of him now, watching him like a hunter sizing up her prey. "You were brought here for one reason," she said. "To be broken, to be claimed, to entertain the empire." The human looked at her with eyes that held storms, not wild, but deep, too deep for comfort. "You want a beast," he said. "You want something you can tame, feed, display, command." He paused just long enough for the silence to grow heavy. What happens if the beast tames the princess instead? Valzara didn't flinch, but inside something shifted. This was no mindless brute. This was no monster to be displayed in chains. She turned without speaking, climbed the stairs back to her throne, her heart calm, but her mind racing back in the shadows of the council. Chamber whispers began again. Why is he not afraid? What power does he hide? Was this a mistake? The human sat alone in his cage, but he was never truly alone. Every camera, every eye watched him, and he watched back later that night, when the stars above blinked like dying candles. One of the guards tried to test him, entered the cage, mocked him, threatened him, in less than a breath. The guard was unconscious. No blood, no noise, just a blink and down he went. The other guards froze. The human sat back down as if nothing happened. They doubled the security, locked every layer. But fear had already entered the palace walls. Valzara stood at her window, looking out, not at the stars, but at the cage. Something about him was dangerous, not because of muscle, not because of strength, but because he was too calm, too aware, too ready. She thought she had asked for a beast, but maybe the empire had delivered something worse. Mind they could not control, a will they could not crush into silence. That spoke louder than any scream. The cage had not moved, but the palace had changed. Guards stood farther from the energy wall. Now some refused to go near it. Beastmasters gave their reports from a distance, and the princess, she watched more than she spoke. The human still said nothing. But his silence felt heavy, like it was hiding something inside. Princess Valzara sat in her private chamber, her drink untouched, her thoughts tangled. She replayed the moment again in her mind. The way he moved, so fast, so clean, like the strike of a Thyssen shadow. But that was not what haunted her. It was his eyes, those unreadable eyes. She had seen madness, rage, fear, even devotion in the eyes of past creatures. But the human, his eyes were different. They didn't look like a prisoner's. They didn't beg for mercy or plan revenge. They just watched, patient, like a storm waiting for the wind to shift. She stood and gave a command. Bring him to the observation room, unchained. The guards hesitated. She repeated herself, voice firm. They obeyed. The room was clean, white walls, bright light, no weapons, no audience, just her and him. He entered with slow steps, not cautious. He didn't bow, didn't speak. He sat when she pointed to the chair. I want to understand you, she said. He looked at her, still silent. Why do you not eat? He said nothing. Why do you not sleep? Still silence. Why do you not even try to escape? The human finally leaned forward and spoke softly. Escape from what? A cage made of light, or a world where you think you're free? She blinked once, caught off guard. He continued, I've seen cages without bars. People living inside them, smiling, obeying, dying slow. His words didn't carry anger, they carried weight and truth. Valzara leaned back, trying not to show how his words landed. She had not brought him here to speak philosophy. She wanted fear, resistance. She wanted something to tame instead. She found a mirror. He spoke again. You think I fear you, but I don't. Why not? She asked. Because fear is for those who still have something to lose. I lost everything when your kind invaded my world. That made her pause. She had read reports. Small planet, primitive defense, no survivors. He watched her carefully. I was a soldier, but I wasn't fighting for power. I was fighting for my people, for my family. They burned while I screamed into smoke. Your soldiers laughed. His hands stayed calm on the table, but his voice broke the room. Valzara looked away for a moment. She had never heard a creature speak of war like this, not with hate but with pain buried deep. He stood slowly, walked toward the glass wall. No chains on me here, but I still feel them in my memory, in my bones. He turned back to her. You didn't capture me. You woke me. She tried to speak, but the words stayed in her throat. He walked to the door, and before leaving, he said something that would echo in her mind for days. Monsters don't always look like beasts. Sometimes they wear crowns. The guards took him back, but Valzara didn't move for a long time. That night she dreamt. She saw flames, children running, skies filled with burning ships. She heard voices screaming, not alien, not foreign, human voices. In the dream, she saw the human again, but this time he was not in a cage. He was standing among stars, leading an army of ghosts. She woke with sweat on her skin, and questions she could not answer. The next day, reports arrived. One beastmaster missing, disappeared during routine scan. No blood, no signs of struggle, only his helmet placed outside the cage. No one knew how it got there. The cage was untouched. Some said the human could move without being seen. Others said he had help, but Valzara said nothing. She ordered a silent watch, no interaction, no provocations. She needed time to think, to understand later. She visited the archives. She pulled reports about the invasion. She read the truth hidden in numbers. Children listed as non-combatants eliminated. Entire cities labeled as collateral. She felt her hands shake. She looked at an image, old, blurred. A soldier holding a burnt child, his face. The same face in her cage. Not a beast, a man, a broken man who refused to bend. And now he was here, not to kill, not to beg, but to show them what they had become. She stood in the darkness of the archive room, alone outside. The night sky blinked with cold stars. Inside, a single thought took shape. What if the council hadn't brought a prisoner? What if they had delivered a weapon, not of fire, not of steel, but of truth? Kind of truth that could tear an empire apart. The throne room was colder than usual, not in temperature, but in feeling. Something had changed, and the council could sense it. They stood around the long curved table, cloaked in shadows, their faces half hidden, but their eyes sharp. At the head of the room sat Princess Valzara, her back straight, her voice quiet. "He is not to be harmed." The words dropped like a weight on the floor. One of the advisors stepped forward, tall, thin, eyes full of fear. "With respect, Your Highness, he is a threat. He is planting doubt. Even the guards are speaking his name." Another voice followed. "Cages cannot hold ideas. We brought you a beast, but what we delivered may be a spark." Valzara didn't answer right away. She had spent nights listening to the silence of his cell, studying his movements, reading old files, and each time, the lines between enemy and victim grew thinner. "I will speak to him again," she said. Alone, the council didn't agree, but no one dared stop her. She entered the private chamber, not as a ruler but as a woman filled with questions. He stood in the center. His eyes met hers without fear. "You came back," he said. She nodded. "I want to know why you haven't tried to escape." He smiled slightly, but there was no joy in it. "Because I already escaped the worst place imaginable." She waited, let him continue. "I escaped your war, I escaped your fire, I even escaped myself." Valzara felt her chest tighten. There was something about the way he spoke, like every word had roots in pain. "I was trained to survive," he said. "But no one trains you for what happens after. When you're alone, when the voices are gone, when the silence becomes louder than the screams." She looked at him carefully. "You speak like someone who still carries the war." He stepped closer, not threatening, just honest. "I carry it because no one else will. Your people erased my world, but I remember every name, every face, and I will not let that memory die." Valzara took a slow breath. "You think memory is enough to fight a system like ours?" He didn't answer. He simply turned his head and looked out the small window in the chamber. "Sometimes you don't fight to win. You fight so someone else doesn't have to." The words stuck in her mind later. She returned to the throne room. The council had already prepared a new plan. They wanted to display him during the Empire's victory parade, strapped, chained, humiliated, in front of the galaxy. Valzara stood in silence as they spoke, each voice sharp, hungry for control. When they finished, she raised her hand. "Denied." Gasps filled the chamber. "You will not use him as a trophy. You will not parade him like an animal." One of the elder lords spoke with anger. "He is dangerous. We must remind the people who holds power." She stepped forward, voice calm, eyes like frozen light. "Power that is afraid of a prisoner is not power. It is weakness hiding behind armor." The room went silent. Whispers began after she left. They called her soft. They called her corrupted, but none dared say it aloud in her presence that night. She summoned the human again, this time to her private garden, a place where only stars and silence lived. He walked behind the guards, still unchained, still quiet. She dismissed the guards, sat near the water pool, motioned for him to scythe, sat without question. "This place," she said, "my mother built it." Before she vanished into war, she said, "Even rulers need somewhere honest." He looked at the sky. "I don't remember what Earth's stars looked like, but I remember how they made me feel." She asked gently, "And how is that?" Like there was still something bigger than pain, something untouched by fire and blood. For a while neither spoke. The garden listened in peace. Then he turned to her. "You don't belong here, not like them." She looked at him, not as a ruler, but as a woman drowning in truth. "Maybe I don't, but I was born in it, shaped by it, expected to rule over it." He leaned forward, then break it, not with weapons, but with choice. She felt a strange fire inside her, not rage, not duty, something deeper, the need to change, to undo what had been done in her name. He stood up. "I don't want revenge, I want truth, because truth is louder than fear, and it lasts longer than power." She watched him walk away this time not as a prisoner, but as a voice she could no longer silence, and in that moment Valzara realized something terrifying. The council was right. He was dangerous not because of what he could destroy, but because of what he could awaken. The palace no longer felt alive. It felt watch. Servants moved slower, guards whispered instead of shouting, and the corridors that once echoed with confidence now held only silence, a silence that had weight, a silence that had power. At the center of it stood the human, still in his cage, still unchained, but never still inside. Every morning he stood at the edge of the energy wall, staring out, studying the world that held him. Every night he sat quietly with his eyes closed, as if speaking to ghosts no one else could see. One morning, a group of guards noticed something strange. A symbol had been carved into the floor of his cage. Small, precise, a circle made from his own dried blood. The design meant nothing to them, but it felt like a message. They erased it. The next day, it returned again. The human said nothing about it. He only watched. Princess Valzara saw the reports, but she said nothing to the council. She had begun visiting the archives at night, reading reports the empire kept hidden there were stories buried deep, tales of human resistance, records that had been labeled as myths, false, erased. But the deeper she read, the clearer the truth became. The humans had not fallen quietly. They had fought until their skies burned. They had resisted until their last breath, and even in defeat they had planted something dangerous. Hope. Valzara stood at her window that night, looking at the stars, thinking of his words. Truth is louder than fear, and it lasts longer than power. She whispered those words to herself over and over. Down below, in the cage, the human opened his eyes. He smiled. The next day, one of the younger guards refused an order. He said he would no longer be part of a system that punished survivors. He said the human had done nothing wrong. The guard disappeared that night. The day after, a servant girl dropped a tray of food outside the princess's chamber. Inside the spilled soup, a tiny message was written in crushed Urbit. Said, "We hear him." Valzara burned the tray before the council saw it, but her hands shook. Rebellion was not being planned in secret rooms. It was spreading like a breath. No flags, no armies, just whispers and belief. She met the human again, this time in a chamber with no guards, no cameras, no watchers. He looked at her, calm but sharper. "You feel it now," he said, "don't you?" She nodded slowly. "There are cracks forming in everything I believed." He stood and walked slowly to the edge of the room. "I told you, you didn't capture me, you brought me." And she didn't ask what he meant, because she already knew. "You're not the only one," he said. "There are others in this palace and outside it who are waiting." "For what?" she asked. "For you to choose a side." She turned away, her voice soft. "If I turn against the council, they will kill me and you and everyone who speaks your name." He walked closer, not with threat, but with truth. "They already will, even if you stay silent." She faced him again, eyes full of storm. "Why? Me? Why not lead them yourself?" He smiled gently. "Because I'm not their future. I'm just the echo of their past." Valzara stood in silence for a long moment. Then she gave him a key card. Not for escape, but for connection. He took it, not with greed, but with purpose. Over the next week, strange things began happening in the palace. Cameras blinked and returned empty footage. Hallways stayed dark for minutes at a time. Supply routes were rerouted without explanation. The council grew restless. One of them demanded a full search of every chamber. They found nothing, but they felt it. The empire was not cracking, it was shifting. Valzara called a secret meeting in her mother's garden. Only 4 people attended, a guard, a servant, an engineer, and the human. They formed no plan, no battle map, only an idea. Truth will move without shouting. It just needs someone to open the door. Later, back in his cage, the human drew the same symbol again. This time it stayed, even after they cleaned it, even after they burned the floor. It returned every night. By morning, it glowed faintly. Someone was helping from inside. Someone with access. The council didn't know who to blame, so they began to blame each other. Suspicion grew. Meetings ended with threats. Trust collapsed exactly as the human had said. Rebellion not with weapons, but with silence. Valzara stood once again in her chamber, holding a data crystal. Inside it were recordings, orders, executions, truths the council had buried for years. She could release them. She could light the fire, but the question stood before her like a wall. Was she ready to become the enemy of her own crown? Outside, the stars watched her unblinking, and in the distance, far beyond the palace walls, the first of many ships powered down their engines, waiting for the signal, waiting for the spark. Rain fell over the palace for the first time in years. Artificial weather was rare, but tonight the skies wept as if the stars themselves knew something was about to change. Princess Valzara stood by the balcony, her royal robes soaked, her crown heavy. The data crystal in her hand felt colder than ever. It was not just a key, it was a weapon. Inside, it lived everything: names, coordinates, proof of what the Empire had done to Earth, to the humans, to hundreds of silent worlds. One small command, in truth, would spread through the galaxy, faster than fire, louder than any fleet. But truth came with a price. She turned from the rain and walked to her inner chamber. There stood the human. He had been brought in secret. No guards, no eyes, only her and him. Looked at her robes, at the trembling fingers holding the crystal. "You found the truth," he said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I found something worse." He stepped forward. "No, you found freedom. It always looks terrifying at first." She walked past him, her boots silent on the marble floor. "I was raised in power, taught to rule, trained to obey tradition. I was told to smile while watching others suffer, and I believed that was strength." He stood still, his eyes calm. "You believed it because you were born inside the cage." She turned sharply. "I was never in a cage." He said nothing, just looked at her, and she understood the cage was never made of walls. It was made of lies, of legacy, of silence, and now she had the key. Suddenly, it quosum. Sound broke the air, an alarm. The council had found something, a message left in one of the palace corridors, written in old human script. 3 words we remember. Earth. Valzara's heart raced. She rushed to the control room, but the human stayed behind. He knew his part was not to run it, was to wait in the council chamber. Voices clashed like metal. They demanded answers, accused one another of betrayal. Some wanted to execute the human, others wanted to silence the growing whispers, but Valzara stood in the center, still and firm. "We are not facing a prisoner," she said. "We are facing the truth we buried." The elders turned on her. "You speak like a traitor." She looked at each of them. "I speak like someone who is no longer afraid of chains." One of the guards stepped forward, trembling, sweating. He held out a small device. It was found hidden in the power core, carved inside a maintenance panel. They activated the device. A hologram appeared. It showed Earth before the invasion, children playing, trees glowing in sunset light, old songs in a language long forgotten. Then came the fire ships, darkened the skies. Explosions swallowed cities. The screen turned red. A final message appeared. "They came as monsters, but we will not forget who we were." The council froze, not because of the message, but because they knew someone had activated this feed across multiple systems. Even now, truth was spreading. Valzara stood tall. "This was never about one man. This is about everything we've done, everything we've hidden." The chamber shook, not from battle, but from fear. They ordered her arrested. But the guards didn't move. Some stepped back. Others lowered their weapons. The human had never touched a single blade, but he had broken something far stronger: obedience. Valzara left the chamber in silence. No one followed. She walked back to the cage, but it was empty. Only the symbol remained, carved deeper than before, glowing softly in the dark. She smiled. He was never meant to stay behind walls. Outside the palace, ships in hidden ports began to raise, not military ships, but vessels full of people, engineers, pilots, forgotten citizens from silenced planets. They had waited long, but now the chains were cracking. The human moved through tunnels, whispers guiding him, eyes watching over him. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't lead crowds. He simply moved, and people followed, not out of fear, but because they saw something in him, something more powerful than anger, hope. In a small medical station near the edge of the capital, He sat beside a child, one of the early victims, saved by a rebel medic. The child looked up at him. "Are you going to destroy the Empire?" He smiled gently. "No, I'm going to remind them what they forgot." The child nodded, then closed her eyes. That night Valzara stood alone again in her chamber, no longer a ruler, no longer a prisoner of her own legacy. She opened a channel, a broadcast system hidden by her mother long ago. It connected to the Empire's deepest roots, the ones they thought were sealed. She spoke one sentence, clear, bold, and final. "We brought home a beast, but what we feared most was that he would teach us to feel human again." The transmission ended, but it had already reached beyond their world. The cage had been shattered and the rebellion had already begun from the inside. The stars no longer looked peaceful. They watched in silence, waiting across systems once loyal to the Galari. Empire. Strange things began to happen. Power stations failed for hours without explanation. Supply routes were interrupted. Small colonies declared they would no longer pay tribute, and above all, one name kept spreading, not from official channels, but through hushed voices and glowing screens. The human. No one knew his name. No one knew where he would appear next, but his message, it lived everywhere. "You are not alone. You are not forgotten." The cage is breaking in the old city of Kareth. An engineer once forced to build weapons, now reprogrammed satellites to send messages of freedom on the mining moon of Torkai. Children sang an old Earth song taught to them by a smuggler who claimed to have seen the humans' eyes in hidden rooms deep inside the capital. Even nobles whispered his words under their breath. Princess Valzara stood in a hidden hangar. She wore no crown, no armor, just a simple coat and boots. Beside her stood the human. He was not the same man brought in chains. His wounds had healed. His strength had returned, but it was his silence that had grown more powerful. She looked at him. "Are you ready for what comes next?" He nodded once. "We are not launching a war. We are answering one that never ended." Their ship, painted black with no markings, rose from the ground like a shadow lifting into the light inside. A crew of 10 waited, not soldiers, but believers, each one from a different world, each one holding a story. The Empire tried to erase Valzara, moved through the corridors, her eyes focused, her voice calm. She was no longer the ruler they remembered. She was something new, something dangerous to the Empire, a symbol of change. The ship entered deep space. No banners, no war cries, only silence. And then they reached the first blockade. 3 Empire cruisers, heavily armed, watching a rebel colony. Nearby, the humans stepped forward. "Open a line, one-way transmission." Crew obeyed. He spoke only once. "This is not your enemy. These are not your prisoners. Stand down or stand aside." The transmission ended for 1 minute. Nothing happened. Then one cruiser turned slowly and drifted away. The others followed. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Sometimes a voice is sharper than a blade inside the command room. A young pilot wiped her eyes. "My brother was killed by them, but I've never seen them retreat before. Not once, not ever." Valzara placed a hand on her shoulder. "We don't need to win through fear. We need to remind them what fear turned them into." More ships joined their cause, some old and slow, others built in secret, under forgotten moons. But each one carried the same light, a future born from truth. Back in the palace, the council trembled. They had tried everything, bribes, threats, even false broadcasts, but people no longer listened to them. They listened to the human. They listened to the one who could not be tamed. One elder shouted in rage, "This is not war. This is infection. This is disease." Another answered quietly, "No. This is what happens when lies rot from the inside." They ordered Valzara captured, dead or alive, but no one moved. Their guards had vanished. Their ships no longer answered. Their throne was now just a chair in a hidden base orbiting a dying sun. Valzara stood before a crowd, thousands of faces from 100 different species. Once slaves, now soldiers of purpose. She raised her voice. "I was born in a palace, fed lies like food, told that power was my right. But I was wrong. The right belongs to those who choose to stand, to those who rise, even when they are afraid." The human stood beside her. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His presence, his silence carried more meaning. Then 1,000 speeches, they launched together, one fleet, one purpose, not to conquer, but to remind the stars what it meant to feel again. At the edge of the Empire's border, the final defense stood waiting, dozens of warships ready to burn everything. Valzara opened a signal. I am not here to destroy you, I am here to give you a choice. Open your eyes or close them forever. The signal ended. For a long moment, space held its breath. Then one by one, the warships powered down and turned away, not because they were forced, but because someone among them remembered. Child lost, a village erased, a song once sung before the fire came. They remembered in that moment. The Empire did not fall by fire, it fell by truth. Valzara turned to the human. This isn't the and they will try again, they always do. He looked out at the stars. Then we remind them again. As many times as it takes. Their ship turned not toward battle, but toward the heart of every world that had been forgotten. They would not rule. They would not rebuild thrones. They would walk among the people and make sure the cage never returned. The sky above the capital turned red, not from fire, not from blood, but from the glow of thousands of ships. Blocking out the stars, the Empire had fallen in silence. Not from war, but from within, and yet its heart still beat in hidden places. A final command. Centered deep beneath the ice of Zarathus, the last stronghold of the Council, guarded by machines that did not dream, and men who no longer asked questions. They called it the core, and inside the core, plans were unfolding. One final weapon, a system buried in forgotten code, a pulse that would shut down every rebel ship in the galaxy. The Council had waited in silence, waiting for the moment to strike back, and now they had it. But what they didn't expect was that someone already knew. Princess Valzara stood at the edge of the rebel command deck, no longer dressed in royal colors, only armor built for movement, her eyes focused, her breath steady. Beside her, the human stood quiet. He had seen the message intercepted by their scouts, the core. One pulse and everything they built would fall. She looked at him. If we go there, we may not come back. He didn't blink. I didn't come this far to survive. I came to finish what was started. They launched at night, a small team. No army, no backup, only belief inside the core. They moved like shadows, silent, precise. Machines tried to stop them, but the human moved through them like wind through smoke. Every hallway, every locked door, every sensor, he passed them all, not because of power, but because of focus, the kind that is shaped by loss and sharpened by purpose. Valzara reached the control room first. She placed the virus disk into the console, uploading a code written by the very people the Empire once silenced. It would erase the pulse, end the threat, shut down the final grip of control. That the console blinked red. Manual override required. One of them had to stay inside the core chamber to keep the system open, to keep the code flowing. She turned, but he was already stepping forward. No, she said, I'll do it. He looked at her. You have to lead. You carry their future. I only carry their memory. She shook her head. You're more than a memory. He smiled gently. No, I'm exactly that, and that's enough. She reached out, took his hand. Something passed between them. Not romance, not goodbye, understanding. He stepped inside the chamber. The door sealed. Valzara gave the order. The upload began. Alarms screamed. Systems collapsed. The Council tried to escape, but their own machines turned against them. Inside the chamber, heat rose, lights flickered. Metal bent, but the human never moved. He stood, hands steady on the control, eyes fixed on the screen, watching the numbers rise. 1% at a time. Outside, in the rebel fleet, ships came alive again, free, safe, untouchable. The pulse was gone. The weapon failed, and the core began to fall. Valzara called his name, but there was no answer, only silence. Then one final voice message crackling through static. You didn't tame me. You showed me the way out. Thank you, now go finish the story. And then he was gone. Chamber collapsed, the ice cracked, and the core disappeared into the depths. But what rose from the ruins was not grief, it was something stronger. Legacy. Valzara returned to Koldis. The people, her face scarred, Her voice calm, she stood before billions on screens, on rooftops, in streets that once burned, and she spoke. This man, this human came to us in chains. We thought he was a beast, but he gave us something we lost. He gave us a reason to feel, to fight, to change. She raised a small object, a necklace worn by him, carried by her now. His name was never important. What he did is, the people lit candles that night, not for mourning, but for remembering. Statues were never built. There were no medals, no parades, only stories, passed from child to child, from world to world. The man who walked through cages without breaking, the one who spoke without shouting, the one who changed an empire without ever firing a weapon. Some say he still walks among the stars. Some say he became part of the wind, part of the fire, part of the memory that no longer fears silence. On quiet nights, when the stars are clear and the winds move soft across the plains, if you listen closely, you might hear his voice, not in words, but in the feeling you get when you know you are no longer caged.